Haidala Isis, Kalkajad Hinudihad Kilgakayang. I'm Erin Brillen, and I'm from the Haida and Cree Nations. Together with my husband, Andy Everson, we have dedicated ourselves to the revitalization and preservation of our cultures. But as each month passes, our communities along the coast lose precious elders. Every time an Indigenous elder passes, gone with them is a lifetime of wisdom that is lost to the coming generations. The Next Ancestors podcast features Indigenous elders and cultural knowledge keepers who have amassed a wealth of knowledge to share with us all. Indigenous wisdom is needed now more than ever to help us navigate in these uncertain times. And through this podcast series, each episode will serve to preserve this valuable wisdom to share with the world before it's too late. Thank you for joining us on the Next Ancestors podcast series, and I am so thrilled to have Chief Robert Joseph, also known as Bobby Joe, here with us today. And I just want to say how I'm so grateful for you to be here with us. I know that you are just endlessly giving back and showing up for things like this, but also just giving back to the culture. And you're literally known far and wide as the chief who just shows up with love everywhere you go. And so I'm so grateful to have you here as our first guest, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you. I'm really happy to be here. You happen to be family for me, and I've watched both of you in love, moving forward together, doing all of these awesome things that you do that contribute to well-being of people, not just Indigenous people, but all the people from around the world who come and visit your beautiful home and business downstairs. I'm just so thrilled to be here. Thank you. I deeply, deeply appreciate that.
When I say far and wide, I'm not exaggerating. When we were in Japan, you were going to give a talk at the consulate. We were there the same day you were giving the talk at the consulate. I thought, wow, he really does get around. They must have had you zoom in on a thing where you're presenting in Japan. So I literally mean it when I mean he's known far and wide across the ocean, across the other side of the world.
And even next week, I'm still traveling a little bit. I'm going to the UK.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Who is the person that you learned the most about your culture from, and what are some of the key teachings that you hold with you today?
Yeah, you know what? There was not just one person, but there were my grandfather on my mother's side, her father. He adopted me. My dad died just before I was born.
Oh.
And so my grandfather took me in with my mother, Sally, my adopted mother. They were the couple who in their time, in earlier times before colonization, still lived community life as we used to.
Oh.
And still abiding strongly to family law and the importance of children. So I felt in those early years, those first 5-6 years, I really felt what love was like, and I really appreciated belonging. Nobody had to describe it in words, you could just belong. And it wasn't just to your grandparents, but the whole community, for all of its children, had a creed that said we were sacrosanct, that we were important, that we had to be cared for, and the whole village, as well as the parents, were responsible for that. And I think that's one of the really important baselines for Indigenous families, being told in old ways that we are cared for and loved and embraced with complete abandon, and that we'd be safe. And like I said, feeling belonging. And belonging is such an important thing. Throughout the course of time, when the newcomers came, we began to be removed from all sense of belonging, personally, individually, from our culture, from our language, from our way of being. And by the time the years flew by, little kids like I was lost touch with that. And it has a really heavy consequence to lose touch. And you don't love yourself anymore, you're embarrassed, you're ashamed. And I just can't understand why people came to our lands and treated us the way they did, so disrespectful. And it's left generations of harm behind it all. You know? Yeah.
When you were younger, did you know that you would become a chief? Did you know that was something that was a part of your
in
path?
those first 5 years, not really. I just felt like a prince, I guess, or somebody valuable. And it was important, and nobody explained it. You felt it, you lived in it. It was just so wonderful, right? It wasn't till much later, even beyond my teens almost, because I grew up in a residential school for those 11 years, and so I wasn't thinking, and I wasn't in contact with the natural surroundings and the families and our caregivers, right? And so there was nobody left to be telling us that we would eventually be people in various situations and stations.
So did you think that the culture, like, it wasn't going to happen, like when you went to residential school and then finished there?
Oh no, you know what? At the same time, and in my book Namiyud, I try to talk about they practiced the culture. They went underground, of course. And I remember early, once or twice, and there are pictures of it, when I was in a mask, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is like a parallel universe. I'm in this mask, and I'm the being that I represent in the mask, and I see the parallelity. There's no such word as that, but
I know what you mean.
yeah. And I knew and felt that, but I didn't know. I couldn't. My level of comprehension wasn't strong enough yet to feel or make or judge the comparisons and how it might impact. We just existed for the moment. And there were really beautiful moments to be in a big house. Even the little kids loved those moments. Even if we were scared of the dark corners and the shadows and Zunukwa or Bukwas, we were in our element. That's where we belonged. And so our emotions were protected in that way, right?
So the potlatches were fairly frequent when you were a child?
They were absolutely very frequent, yeah. Because we were living in isolation on the mainland, right? The Muslim Tribal Council now were the last to, as extensively as possible, practice potlatch, because the authorities were not often present.
Oh, so they weren't
Yeah,
policing
they couldn't
you
be
as
bothered
much.
going into the isolation, traveling up the river to Kinkham Inlet and stuff like that.
So when you were a child, you were there to observe and witness, and did you
That's what
participate?
we were, yeah. And we didn't know that. They didn't say, you're going to observe and witness. They said, keep still, watch, listen. And they didn't say, so you can learn, right? It was subconscious sort of.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best way to learn. Not to be told, you got to learn this,
Yeah.
but you're doing it by some natural process of, I don't know how you describe it.
Like osmosis, or like when you're just in the environment and you're soaking it in.
Yeah, you just soak it in
Yeah.
without knowing it even.
Yeah.
Right? And that's so natural, right? That's part of the natural world that we lived in.
What phase of your life did you realize that you were going to be taking on a chief's seat, and can you describe how that happened?
Yeah, very late. I eventually left residential school, and my experience was really traumatizing, horrifying, and it had a consequence for me, almost lifelong. And I left there completely broken, without any sense of hope or purpose or value. And when you're traumatized like that, it's likely that you're going to become a part of addiction. And so for me, that's what happened. I every time those memories flooded back, I would, my response was, oh my God, gotta have a drink. And of course I had more drinks and more drinks. And I had to become a pretty hopeless alcoholic in the stage of my life before I suddenly realized. And it wasn't because I had the intellect to realize it, it was because I had this divine intervention, right? This vision about who I was. And that vision that I had was that I was loved and that I belonged. And that was enough, well, that's lots, enough to turn my life around. And then I began to slowly realize my responsibilities as a human being is not to be reckless or thoughtless or careless or not thinking about anything in an important way. I started realizing that I had responsibilities. And because of my life experience to that point, and all of my life living in brokenness and despair, I wanted to help mitigate that for others. And I discovered as I started to do that I began to heal. So I'm thinking I'm the healer here now, but I'm healing.
Yeah.
So it's reciprocal, right? I think all of us, most of us who have the misfortune of falling into the circumstance that I just described, discover that.
Yeah.
We are all healers. You and I and Andy, Mom, and some of our less fortunate relatives who may be on the street. At some point, we learn from each other, and at some point, healing becomes the focal point. And that's so important. That's how we're decolonizing. The whole issue of residential schools and the discovery that we had been subject to genocide and all of the trauma associated with that has led us to this moment and placed us in a position where we actually are not going to only heal ourselves, but we're going to heal those other people too, and the world and this planet. That's how big my vision is about who we've become as people who are ostracized, hated, dismissed, and I think that's our primary purpose overall in the grand scheme of things. Indigenous people around the world hold knowledge that may save this planet yet.
Exactly. That's exactly why I wanted to do this podcast. And one of the things that I really appreciate about you is how forthright you are about your struggles with addiction, and then how that spiritual experience you had really turned things around for you.
Yeah.
But your story in and of itself is so powerful that it really does heal people when you tell that story. And it gives people hope too, people who are still stuck in addiction. So tell me about did you get a clear sense of purpose for your life when you had that spiritual experience? Like you said, you knew, like you had responsibility. That's when you really knew you needed to step up.
Yeah, when I had this vision and I heard this voice say to me, in spite of what you've done to yourself, I love you and you're part of all of this, the universe. That's the picture in the back of the book.
Yeah.
You're beautiful to that.
Yeah.
And it was the universe. That picture represents the universe for me, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know right away. It took a long time before I actually made the shift. I don't know, 2 decades probably.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So sometimes the seeds of hope and balance and harmony and wellness take time to manifest.
Right. It wasn't an instant
Yeah.
shift. How old were you when you had that experience?
37, somewhere in there. Yeah.
And then it took a while. But like, when did you take on your chief seat?
In the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. And it took all that time before I was even starting to think that. What happened then was that I wanted to be a good boy around that period, right? So I went to all the potlatches in Alert Bay. And at that time, you could count almost on with your hands how many attendees were there. Not very many people.
Really?
And so there would be what they called the June sports, and there'd be a potlatch at the same time. So all the young people would flood in the afternoon as the potlatch started. And then when the first game started, they all flooded out. So there'd be just me and the old people, maybe a few young people.
Oh, wow.
A small handful. And because I kept going back, the next thing they did was, oh, you have to be an attendant. And nobody said, this is what you know, or ought to know, and these are the things you do when you're attendant. Nobody.
Oh, they just threw you in there.
They just sort of shoved you in there. And so I became an attendant and just repeatedly was an attendant, right? And still nobody, you had to learn as you
But
went.
you didn't have too much guidance. They just
No guidance. And then over time, somebody said, oh, you're going to have to be speaker today. We don't have any speakers.
Oh.
So I went and I got up to speaker. And it was the same thing. Go and speaker. Go and be a speaker. And I had to learn over time, what the heck does a speaker do? What are his responsibilities? And no one ever sat me down and said, here are the commandments about being a speaker.
So you weren't really that familiar with the protocol?
No, not at all. Not, other than what I was exposed to subconsciously growing up as a little kid, going to potlatches. And I think the old people, the elders at that time, were, well, they were stuck between a rock and a hard place. Where else could you go?
Right.
Yeah, and so it was sort of mutual as an experience. I remember one time there were a couple of elders on the side, and I said something, and I saw them laughing. And I said, I thought there was, I must have made a mistake. So I went to them afterwards, and I said, you know what? I saw you laughing. I don't mind that, as long as you're willing to tell me what you laughed about, so I could learn. Right? Yeah. And so that was by rote, to learning slowly to be a speaker. And there couldn't be any other way, because the old ways of mentoring, tutoring, teaching speakers or attendants or anybody else in the potlatch circle just didn't exist anymore as a process, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to picture like the generation that you grew up in, and there was still people trying to keep traditions intact, but it was still sort of precarious in a way.
Yeah. I think during that particular period, because young people, even younger than me then, had a real desire to know what culture was or is or meant. And they went when they did, but they were distracted. It was a really difficult period for all of us. You know, when I look now, it's so powerful. Young people really are knowledgeable. They've learned. They're brilliant. They're smart. I'm so happy that I've lived long enough. I'm persuaded in my own mind that the culture is going to survive, or our ceremonies are going to prevail, and now we're reaching out to have a deeper comprehension of the meaning of this beautiful, powerful constitutional like context called potlatch, right? Well, I'm pretty sure that most young Indigenous people are proud of their culture.
Yeah.
And when you start doing that pride eventually seeps into your own consciousness.
For sure.
And you become a proud Indigenous person, right?
Yeah. I always think about our culture and the fact that it's always evolving and things are always changing. But is there certain parts of the traditional aspects of the culture that you really hope remains the same for the coming generations?
Yeah, absolutely. If we thought it was that loosey-goosey, we're dead. We're going to lose it. It's not that. There are essential elements and protocol of the culture, which kind of creates the overall format that need to be in place forever, because we represent back in time something that worked in the natural world, especially, and in the context of all that, we knew more about our relationship with the universe, with each other, with the animal world, with the things that fly, and everything. We mimic that in our dances. So we see a seashell or a whale or a fish or a thunderbird, or whatever it was, we mimicked it. And it was that way in which we found the ability to remember the oneness, the wholeness of creation. That's what Nimuyit's all about, actually, in a deep level. And we never lost sight of that until more recent times. We began to lose it. And some of our more eager, energetic young people who were taking over had some, were looking through colonial glasses or a perspective that they thought that everything has to change, including anything in the potlatch. And I think that's really, really dangerous. It's one thing we have that's unique in all the world, the Gwawaenuk, the Haida, the New Channel, each of us, all of us. It's the one thing that we have that was absolutely real and divinely driven, right? And if you have something that you think is divinely driven and the source is from a greater, higher power, creator, Nawalak, whatever we call them, there's a purpose for that. And it's to make sure that we contain all of the objectives, the elements of what it was about our culture and dance and song and ritual that allowed us not perfect understanding or union, but allowed us at our highest consciousness, I would like to talk about consciousness, to try to adhere to that. And if we violate all of that, we'll be colonized. It'll be complete.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there some specific protocols that we should really make sure we're adhering to as the coming generations? Because I think, that we're not in an era where people can just make things up.
Yeah, you know what?
We don't want that to happen. So how do we know which ones we should really adhere to?
Well, first of all, the most fundamental perspective or belief never detract from the idea that we had our own beginnings, our first ancestors, right? So if you know your own beginning and your own first ancestor, you know the territory.
Right.
And over time, when you hear about the history of our people, they have they've created laws and values and everything else about us that has allowed us to grow in the ways that we were meant in the first instance to grow, to love Mother Earth and everything else, that we're all interconnected. We all have a responsibility for balance and harmony and that kind of stuff. So that was really, really important. And I think the other thing is that there were elements of the potlatch dance and ceremony that were sacrosanct. They never varied other than the names or the ways in which they publicly displays these things, like the Hamatsa. There's only one Hamatsa, and we should not give him a new definition.
Right.
Coppers, they're historical coppers. We haven't been able, and I don't think any of the other groups have been able to sit down and say, what do we do now? We've lost sight of all of the existing historical facts around
Right.
coppers. What about these young people who are growing up now, and how are they going to apply copper in their
Right.
ritual, right?
Yeah, we talked about that when I interviewed Andy, because now it's sort of held up as a symbol of wealth.
Yeah.
Whereas in previous times, they actually had a dollar value. They had names, they were traded. They were a commodity, really,
Yeah,
right? A currency.
There were a personification of a family or a chief's standing, right? So when you wanted to reflect that glory and the greatness, you held up the copper, and you're talking about the family behind them, right?
Right.
And I think that's really important to do. And there may be, we have to go back in time and see if we can find out how did they originate the first coppers. That's still valuable if we can have a reference point for that. That way we bring forth all the rules and regulations and values and principles around the copper, and it's not just an object.
So I've seen the list that George Hunt had documented with all the names and the values of those coppers,
Yeah.
and some of the values in today's dollars would be over $100,000 in today's values. So it's pretty astonishing. And I think that when Andy Potlatches were going to do a trading of a copper payment between my clan and him.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to bring back the monetizing aspect of the copper, because that's not something that's been done lately that I know of anyways.
Yeah, and that's really important. I think all the aspects of the copper need to continue to be ritualized.
What do you think the key role of a chief is? Like, what do you think are the most important parts of being a chief?
Well, I think you have to begin when you're a chief, first of all, to know your own history. And I didn't know my own history. Most chiefs don't know their own history.
Like the origin story part, you mean?
No,
or the lineage?
They have to understand from where the origins of chieftainship flow. So all of our tribes existed, the Gwawaenuk tribes existed, and each of the groupings had subgroupings.
Right.
Like Muskwauk had 4 tribes, the Numkis I think had 6 tribes. Other tribes were mostly 4, but others 6 or a little more. If we try to honor our history, honor the potlatch, honor the copper, honor the dances, the hamatzas, and all the dances. It's a teaching in itself. All of the dances that we place on our offspring, they take over the dance, and it's a teaching. And those young people learn so many things as they become initiated or part of all of the ceremony, right? That somebody cares for them, they belong somewhere, it's the clan. And the symbolism of a dance is intended to transfer the spirit and the intent of that dance to this new dancer to guide him or her in her life. And I think everything about the potlatch has a lesson or more, a teaching that is not just drama or theater or mystique or anything like, or magic or anything. It's
I think
real practical intention that when you pass it on to this young man and this young lady, there's some things you got to know about it, and it'll help you to grow and move forward with confidence and pride or responsibility, sense of responsibility.
I was going to say that I think that one of the misunderstandings about what happens at potlatches is that the dances are meant to entertain people. And I'm like, oh, no. This has nothing to do with entertaining people. It's really about those origin stories and the connections to the natural world. And like you said, giving a responsibility to your offspring to uphold those prerogatives. And that was the more important part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's our job, our responsibility, to bring that level of understanding back to our own culture.
Right.
And it's not going to come unless you talk about it, unless Andy talks about it, and others talk about it. And it's not just show and tell. And you're right. I know it's beautiful and it's powerful to observe and see, but the real strength of it all is in the comprehension and understanding of what it really means. I think our potlatch and all of the ceremony, dance, and protocol, among other intentions, the exercise of the potlatch was reinforcing all of the interconnectedness, the wholeness, the oneness of who we are, where we come from, where we belong. I think in our education in the years to come, it should revert back to some really deep teachings about potlatch and our culture.
Yeah.
And if we do it, others will begin to do it. And those people, the newcomers here who can't seem to appreciate some of these things, will begin to see it, understand it. It's going to be unavoidable that they don't see it, because we're here together now.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that's really important. I know we struggle lots with the newcomers, right? But they're here to stay.
Yeah.
So we either continue to fight them and hate them sometimes, or we reach out and try to find a way to create understanding between us, right? And the only way to do that is to have dialogue, real dialogue. Transformation doesn't happen unless you have dialogue and deeper, better, greater understanding, right?
Yeah. So I'm thinking about, in traditional culture, there would have been a lot of mentorship that happened with up and coming chiefs. And that's a piece that's sort of missing today. And I was wondering if you had some specific guidance or advice for up and coming chiefs or new chiefs.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a system that's truly been violated or dismissed or just not paid attention to. But there are people out there who are still familiar with it in all the families. There'll be someone in all of our clan, all of our families, who knows something that we haven't heard yet.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us, between all our families, to begin to have discussions about the knowledge keepers, the ones who some of these things have become deep secrets because nobody's wanted to hear it, for one thing. And so the people who hold a deep secret have been inhibited from sharing that knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And somehow we've got to find a way to elicit those deep secrets back to everyday conversation. So we need to talk to each other, have relationships that allow us to talk deeply about potlatch and protocol, and meaning of dance and song. So we need to find people who really care to get out there and talk to them and tell them, you know what, you belong to this beautiful, powerful culture that might be a remedy for all of the ailments that we currently face in this time, right? If we recreate our relationships and talk to each other.
Yeah, relationships are really important. So do you want to tell us about how you felt when you first became a chief and your first potlatch and all of that? And that was a journey to get there?
I never set out to ever want to be a potlatch chieftain.
Oh, really?
No, never. But as I slowly began to understand a little more, about how significant those things were, I began to think about it, talk to my relatives, my family, and finally the residential school issue came, and I got a settlement, and I thought, oh, what do I want to do with this settlement, this money?
Right.
I've never had money, and never will probably. But I said, I think I know what I want to do. I want to spend it on a potlatch.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. That's an awesome use of the money.
Yeah. And so I talked to my elders again and said, what do you think? You think I should have a potlatch? Yeah, you should have a potlatch. And I talked to Adam Dick's mother. Yeah, you really should. You know, I've been watching you in the big house all the time, being attendant.
You were a speaker.
And then a speaker. I think it's important for you to take your chieftain standingship because some people, she said, not all people, but some people are complaining that you haven't earned your dues. In spite of all the potlatches I've been to, you don't earn your dues until you actually get in.
Right.
Yeah.
Until you potlatch.
And then the light went on. I said, all right, I'm going to have a potlatch.
So you knew you had a lineage chieftain seat put on you, but And how old were you when you potlatched?
But I was fairly old, not way old, but fairly old.
Like middle-aged?
Yeah,
maybe
40-ish or late 30s or something.
Yeah. And how did it feel to put on your first potlatch?
Oh my gosh, when I was done, I felt so perspectives about myself, about who I was, based on my earlier life experience in the school, and based on my individual behavior, downfall, addiction, alcohol and stuff. It felt so good that in my mind, it allowed me to think beyond, past all of that, and to say, this point is a new beginning. And that if I was going to take that position and hold it up, that I would not only change, but the change itself would hold me to the change. But when morally your insight is lifted because of something you've done or heard or learned, it's more difficult to reverse, to go back. And so you never want to go back, and your sense of purpose deepens and heightens. In all of my life experience, with all of the gloom and the doom and the brokenness and the despair, that all of that happened. It was meant to be. And in the last window of my life, 40 years and on, I'll be 85 pretty quick. That was the reason. And so I found some value in all of that mess and learned a lot from it that prepared me for what I've been doing. So suddenly I'm just worthless.
No way. Worth more.
That becomes really famous for me, right?
Yeah.
And travel the world, and people hang on every word.
Yeah.
And I think, oh my gosh, that was what that was all about. Because I'm not very smart, but I do know that a lot of people think that a lot of the things I say have value, right?
Oh, totally.
And so I'm starting to accept that. And when you do that, the sense of responsibility deepens, right?
Yeah.
And then my idea that I'm serving somebody or something deepens. And then your sense of value increases, right?
Yeah.
But even in spite of that, there's a little voice in here that says, nah, you're not good enough. Yeah, when you've been damaged like I was damaged, that little voice somehow managed to be up here and creeps up every once in a while.
Even now it still does?
And then I got to look back on my life and say, hey, no, little voice, get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
That's for sure. I think I'm not the only one who thinks that the non-Indigenous people have a lot to learn from Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous wisdom. Is there certain things that you want to share that you really feel that non-Indigenous people could learn from our ways?
Human values, pure human values based on love and connection and belonging were natural ways for us. Newcomers, what's their most valuable sort of thing they hold on to? Money,
Material
profit,
stuff. Yeah.
power. While we've been pre-contact living with natural laws that are so obviously correct, and we lost sight of that as we became colonized. We've succumbed to the idea that unless we're rich or famous, that there's no worth to our lives, which is far from the truth. I bet you there are homeless people on the street who have more sense of compassion and care and love for others. It's amazing the difference, right? I think that was inherent in old teachings when old chiefs and matriarchs sat around and talked. They had this natural ability to feel or sense the imbalance or the disconnect and wanted to work around it. And I think over time that's how the potlatch manifest as a constitutional framework. It was moral, political, not legal in the sense of modern day legal, but
our own rules.
Binding. Yeah.
So for those of us of this generation and the coming generations who are working to uphold the culture, is there certain things that you really want us to make sure that we're passing on and continuing those on?
But I want the young person, you young people who are doing this thing and attempting to make it right and pass it on. The most important thing is that you believe absolutely and practice and live what you're going to be passing on to the next generation.
Yeah.
So that your conscience is aligned with everything that you are.
Yeah, we're not just doing it for show.
No. And there's nothing stronger than personal example. So you've got to be absolutely, and it's nothing to do with culture per se, but absolutely loving and be open. When you hear a young person spouting off and you know they're absolutely wrong, be kind.
Yes.
Talk to them instead. Create the understanding.
Well, again, this is something I appreciate about you.
Count to 10 before you.
You're a good role model for that because you approach everything with so much love. And I think there's a lot of cultural teachers out there that are really harsh in the way that they correct people and that really can throw people off and make people turn away from culture if they've been shamed by an older person. And you never come across that way, and you're always so loving. So we definitely want to follow in your footsteps in that regard and be gentle with people who are still learning.
Yeah, I think that's what's important. All the other things, you can work it out over time. But for you to show up authentic, honest, true to your word and yourself, people know that.
Yeah.
And it's so important for all of us to strive to be that kind of person, right?
Yeah.
And that's the best advice I could give. Because I really have faith in you guys, actually. I've been watching you all the time for a long time. That you try to do that as best you can. That you show up, and it's you guys that show up, behaving, thinking, responding in ways that are in uniformity with your spirit. Right? Not hurt anybody, not judge anybody, but to nurture them, right? Just caress their body, mind, soul.
There's a number of language learners right now that are trying to step up into the role of becoming a speaker. And that's something you've done for generations now, for several decades.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific advice for how to become a good speaker in the big house?
Yeah, there are a whole number of things that are preparatory that would be helpful, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that would be to know your first ancestor story, know the family stories, know the box of treasures, know everything that's in it and their meaning, know in general the overall context of the potlatch
Right.
practice. And speak with passion.
Yeah.
Speak with the greatest speakers I ever saw were those old guys in front of me. They were passionate because they knew what they were talking about. They're absolutely be confident. And if you all of those things, the odd mistake people will forgive you for, and never be judgmental, and never be hard on yourself. Because remember, you're the speaker. You're the speaker in that moment. Nobody else. And not too many people get that privilege to be speaker. You're not only speaking for your time or the moment in time, you're speaking for the generations of your ancestors before you.
It's such a big role. And just for context for people who aren't aware, the chief doesn't speak during a potlatch. It's really the speaker is the sole duty is to speak on behalf of the chief and explain everything that's going on in the ceremony. And, you know, you're announcing names as they're given and dances that are given. And these things have to be really accurate because this is like the document of what's happening, right? And we're all there to witness. So the role of the speaker is probably one of the main roles in the whole.
So there you go. You described it better than I did.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of people who probably are thinking, what's a speaker? I don't understand what's going on. So just to give context for...
It's really an important role. And if you know that, it has the potential and the impact to not only be in the moment with people in a big house, but for generations to come. People that can be relying on some of the things that you said, 2, 3, 4 generations from now, the young people can look back and say, oh, the old man said that 4 generations ago. And so you better be as close to the truth as you possibly can be, right?
I think about what a challenge it is because it's not just the role, but these people are having to learn the language and try to pronounce things properly. So that's a whole nother challenge that it's a lot of work to take on that role.
You know, it must be really frightening for new language learners. For me, that was my first language growing up. Then I forgot it for a long time. I was ashamed to speak it for a long time. But at least I knew the language, right? And even knowing it to the degree that I did caused apprehension. Was I right? Was I wrong?
Yeah.
And we simply have to go on the basis of what we know to be the truth that we're sharing at the moment and not second guess ourselves. But right now you're fulfilling in that moment, in that space, the requirement of a speaker explaining, telling everything that needs to be told, and inspiring.
Yeah.
Inspiring those people, right?
Yeah. Well, you definitely are an inspiration, and we hope to live up to your standards and your ability to love.
Well, you know what? You too. I'm going to come back. If you haven't, way later. I'm in the spirit world. I'll remind you guys.
Okay. I'm so happy to have the chance to sit down with you today.
It was just so nice to be here. Before I walked in here, I've always had so much respect for you guys.
Oh, thank you.
Way before, yeah.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I was